Hello and welcome to another episode of the People of Payments podcast. I'm Nathan, founder of 𝗧𝗿𝗃 Talent, and today I'm excited to chat with Andrei 𝗂𝗂𝗁𝗂, EU Public Policy Lead at TrueLayer. Now, Andrei has an impressive background in public policy and now plays a key role in innovating payment solutions across Europe. Not only are we going to dive into insights from Andrei regarding his career to date, including his challenges and successes, but we'll also take a look into the evolving regulations across the payments industry, including PSD3, PSR1, and the impact that this is going to have across the payments landscape. Andrei, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today, and thank you for joining us. How are things on your side?
No, thank you for having me on the podcast. Very much looking forward to this.
Fantastic, amazing. Well, again, appreciate your time. So let's dive straight into this, and it's very clear from your background that you haven't necessarily come from a payments background. So TrueLayer is that kind of introduction, if you like, into payments, but very strong background in public policy. So what was it specifically, I guess, that caught your attention in payments, and what is it from your previous experience within public policy that's really been able to influence the work you're doing at TrueLayer?
For sure. Well, I'm one of those people who kind of stumble into payments. I think that those are two main categories of people who work in payments, especially if you're in there for a long time. You're either super passionate about some technical aspect of it, or you kind of stumble upon it. And I'm in the latter category. Although I have made payments myself for a while. So I've been in public policy for over a decade now. I've worked with clients in the tech space or the telecom space. I've worked in times of kind of change and disruption. And so when I kind of heard about TrueLayer and got to meet some of the people, I really liked the story of TrueLayer as a challenger, being in this space that's dominated by incumbents, having a small kind of plucky upstart, finding their way through and kind of seeking to make a difference. That resonated very well with me, and I wanted to contribute to that. And it also seemed like a very, at the same time, competitive and friendly place to work, which was a very nice mix. And I think that the past couple of years have only reinforced that perception.
Yeah, okay. I guess in terms of the influences, so coming out of, I mean, you've been at the British Embassy at the start of your career as an intern, you went into then the Swedish Embassy. So how has that kind of experience been able to shape what you've been doing at TrueLayer?
Yeah, so look, I wanted initially to be a diplomat or get into diplomacy in some kind of way. And this is like, my first experience in the job market were as an intern at the UK Embassy in Romania, and then I worked a bit at the Swedish Embassy as an assistant as well. So I kind of wanted to do these things, which is, government relations, understanding policy, translating the different topics, sometimes very technical, to different audiences, and also making a change, making an impact, making a difference. I think there's having spent some time in university, both kind of undergraduate, graduate, I also felt the need to apply. So not just keep things theoretical. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. And then I found this public policy space, which applies very much the same skills as diplomacy. It's just in a kind of coming from a different angle. And so, yeah, I've, like I said, about 10 years spent a lot of my time kind of in parallel to Brexit. That was a big period of disruption and change for European public policy. So I think that was actually quite useful and formative. I also spent quite a bit of time with what's essentially the US Chamber of Commerce here in London. Again, after Brexit, so it was a period of working with UK and US companies to improve trade relations, to manage kind of, like I said, very intense, sometimes very, very acute policy change, and also improve relations with Europe. So I kind of always had the kind of European angle to what I was doing. So that's kind of where I think that there's a lot of elements from that path which apply very well with, now we're the small fintech company with European roots and DNA, wanting to kind of navigate this period of change, regulatory change, commercial, everything change, and kind of make our mark.
Fantastic. Sounds good. All right, nice. And look, obviously you've been at TrueLayer now for 2.5 years, very close to 2.5 years, and I'm sure going into the business initially and the landscape that you were surrounding at that point compared to now, not only the environment but also your responsibilities and role has evolved as time has gone on. So, what does your current role at TrueLayer really encompass right now, and how has that adapted since you first joined?
Of course. So indeed, it has changed, but also in many ways it hasn't. So what I do in TrueLayer is I lead our EU public policy and EU government affairs functions. It's a very small function, as you might imagine. We're not Microsoft or Apple. But essentially what I do, what I'm responsible for is, first of all, understanding what's coming on the horizon, what regulatory, what policy changes are coming that would affect TrueLayer, and of course, advising the company afterwards, like what should we do about it? If there is an opportunity to influence the policies that are coming in by, providing evidence, data that we have access to, and maybe policymakers don't, that is also a key part of my role. But like I said a bit earlier, I think essentially how I see my role is one of translation, of translating topics between different audiences. You translate between the technical people within TrueLayer and policymakers outside. Of course, sometimes also trying to reach other, let's say, non-expert, non-technical audiences as well, and trying to make it as compelling and understandable as possible. And like I said, things change because 2.5 years is quite a long time in fintech. And what TrueLayer, what the payments, what the open banking scene is right now is very different from when I joined. But it also, at the heart of public policy, I think, is the understanding that you're working on slightly longer timelines. Policy is made over several years, and so there's always the North Star is there. What I joined to do in January 2022 is still there. So we're still working on the incoming changes to open banking. We've just had instant payments, the instant payments regulation come in. So that's, that's still in the works. So it is this, I think this is part of the interesting part about working in public policy in a tech company, is the fact that as a tech company, you're supposed to move fast. Like the good tech companies move fast.
Yep.
There's a lot of change. If something doesn't work, you discard it. At the same time, for public policy, the horizon, the timeline is much longer. So you need to kind of find ways to help your company in the short term, but also keep the long term in mind and kind of help on that front as well.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned earlier in there around the kind of cross-functional elements, if you like, and kind of working closely with the engineering team and communicating kind of policy changes with other people in the business. We all know that the compliance, regulations, policies, is a whole nother language to some people, right? And when you are trying to engage with other people in the business that maybe haven't come from that background, that could be quite complicated. I mean, how do you find kind of solving that challenge across the business to be able to communicate, exactly what's changing in the policies with either engineers or salespeople or whoever that might be in the business?
Yeah, that's a tough one, to be honest, because there's no one answer to it. It's a combination of many things. I'm a firm believer, and I mean, I thought I was a clear writer and communicator before I joined TrueLayer, and then I understood that there are there's more levels to it. So there's always, you can always go deeper, and you can always be clear. And so I think it's a mix of several things. Building relationships is very important. So building relationships with people, engineering and product on one side, with policymakers on the other, and kind of keeping those lines of communication constantly open. I think that's part of it, because it is an iterative process in a way. Sometimes you will need to repeat certain things. Sometimes you will need to have things repeated at you several times to really understand it. But being in a space where that kind of learning and dialogue is encouraged has been very valuable to me. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why TrueLayer stands out in my career as a place to work, is having that approach to kind of that internal culture of learning. And I think as you learn, it becomes easier to communicate it more easily. And, like I said, it is a process. Sometimes even today, I'm still learning how to do that. But I think it does start with the relationships and having kind of the humility to understand that you will always have new things to learn. So it's a constant process.
Yeah, and you obviously started to talk there about TrueLayer themselves, and let's be honest, TrueLayer are really kind of at the forefront of innovation within payments, right? So everything from accounts to account payments, you have the variable recurring payments, lots of stuff going on. I mean, what is it in your opinion? You've mentioned there about the culture already as being one of those things, but what is it that really makes TrueLayer not only stand out from the crowd, but kind of really be a market leader within this space?
Well, the first thing I would say is probably because it's that we were one of the first companies to see the opportunity. So the founders essentially were working in Silicon Valley. They heard about this new piece of regulation, PSD2, so the payments regulation, which had this couple of open banking paragraphs to it. They saw this opportunity that, look, maybe there's something to this, and they moved to Europe and started a company. So we were founded very close to when PSD2 came in. I think that's part of it. I think having that time to grow and evolve with the regulation is one of it. But in a more profound way, I think there is the culture and caring about people, investing in people and their development, and kind of trusting them that they will deliver for you. And I think that I see that quite a lot. I think we have a really good technical team that just builds really good products. I think at the end of the day, however much marketing and gloss you can put on it, it's just we have the best product. And I do believe that, and you see it in the stats, let's say. And then I think that those are the main things. And I think as your company grows and develops, especially, I think we have a very particular situation where we're an incumbent, a challenger, growing with a growing side of the industry. So you get to learn as you do, and if you're quick to discard things that don't work, quick to jump on things that do work, and understand that there's many things that you can do in this space, I think you'll be successful. But it's kind of, I think it is in a way heartening and interesting how it starts with the people, and like putting trust in the people you hire, people you work with.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I mean, look, I think there's some great things about TrueLayer. That, I mean, you've already mentioned about the people, the culture, and that's a really important thing for any business, right? Is to get that culture right in the company. We've had numerous conversations with people on the podcast that's really focused on the kind of diversity, the culture, and how you kind of grow that in a business. And I think TrueLayer is a really good example of how you do that, right? And look, if we kind of move on from the kind of background a little bit there, so when we look at payments as a whole, I believe truly that here in the UK, for example, we're quite spoiled from the payments infrastructure that we have available to us, and that doesn't seem to be the same across Europe, right? But ultimately, there does seem to be a big drive to change and adapt and to kind of modernize across Europe. But I guess, from your perspective, why do you think there's such a disparity between the infrastructure layers that we have here in the UK versus the rest of Europe?
The UK is definitely a market leader, especially in account-to-account payments, real-time payments in Europe. I think the situation is a bit more nuanced than that. Ultimately, the EU is 27 different markets, right? Whereas the UK is one country. Every single country in Europe will have its own dynamics, its own culture about payments. Are people more used to paying with cash? Are people used to using credit and debit cards? Are they used to other alternative payment methods? These are all factors that come in kind of beyond the regulatory side of it. Like, you define some rules, but then how people actually use it in practice can be quite different. Then I think that you have some, there are some shortcomings for sure. For example, when it comes to real-time payments, we've had the infrastructure for real-time payments, which is the SEPA Instant scheme, since I think 2017 it was, but it hasn't really been widely adopted, widely used. where there are many situations even today where your bank may have it on offer for you, so you can make that transfer. But if it costs €12 to make a €15 payment, who's going to choose that, right? So the fees that are charged have been prohibitive. On open banking, again, it's been a bit of a mixed picture. There are countries that are doing better than others, and banks that have implemented open banking better than others. Ultimately, that is the main challenge with Europe, not just in payments, but in many other fields. How do you harmonize this union of 27 different countries? But we are seeing, and I think we're gonna get to it, but like with PSD3, with PSR, we are seeing some, like, the direction of travel is definitely encouraging. And I think once you understand that you need to, if you want, depends on what your objectives are. If your objective is to create an alternative to US card companies, which are dominating the payments market, then you need to do certain things, right? You need to offer a level of customer experience to end users that encourages adoption. And I think we are moving in that direction, even though maybe slower than maybe we wanted.
Yeah. Okay. And you already alluded there to PSD3, PSR1, and ultimately the kind of impact that's going to have across the ecosystem. So, I guess a lot of people that would listen to this podcast are probably aware, certainly, of PSD3 and PSR1. But just for those who are tuning in that aren't aware, could you break down ultimately what is PSD3 and PSR1? And how do you believe this is not just going to reshape, but certainly make an impact within that payment space?
For sure. So PSD3 it's still in progress, right? It's an ongoing process. Nothing's really set in stone. But what it is an update to the current rules that we have right now for digital payments. So where PSD2, or the Payment Services Directive, where it kind of laid out all the rules for digital payments, for all digital payments, but also for open banking. So that was the formal start, if you will, of open banking in Europe. And, giving PSPs the ability to initiate payments or to access account data to make use of it for their end users' benefit. So PSD3 comes and kind of seeks to upgrade that. So it doesn't seek to throw out everything. It just seeks to build on what PSD2 has done, improve it, maybe tweak some of the technical functionality. And I think as far as we're most concerned is like in the open banking part, improving the APIs, improving the connectivity between banks and TPPs, so that we can basically, as I was trying to say, get to the level of seamless, fast, frictionless payment experience that customers really expect right now. Like, what do we expect right now? We expect one-click checkouts and quick, like if you want to buy your ticket or your product, whatever, just pay quickly without going through unnecessary steps and friction. And that is what ultimately we can achieve through PSD3. And that's what I think that the European Commission itself had in mind when it started the process. But, again, looking at this slice of it, which is open banking. So, like I said, we're not final yet, so it's going to take a couple of more years until it's enforced and ready to go. But that's I think what we'll expect to see. And there's a lot more to it. There's other pieces of regulation alongside it which change things. I think the instant payments regulation I mentioned is a really important one. But ultimately, if it goes right, I think that's what we'll get through PSD3 is allowing all Europeans to make account-to-account payments seamlessly and at very low cost. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle that's missing right now.
Okay, and it is that aim to standardize this, right, as well across across Europe. And I mean, when we look at how it's going to influence things, you've already mentioned around the technicality side of things. So looking at APIs and how they standardize the APIs. There's also going to be big impacts here, I guess, for fraud mitigation when you look at how they're going to set this out as well. But ultimately, it's going back to that market adoption piece. So when we spoke about the challenges and why we think there's a disparate around the UK versus Europe, and you mentioned around how they're able to adopt it, is PSD3 kind of forcing that adoption process, or how is it going to enable the adoption across Europe?
Well, it should help it. That's definitely the hope. Right now, what you're seeing is a lot of payment journeys, which are very hard to get through, and customers abandon payments. They switch to the kind of maybe a more familiar card payment or cash if that's available at point of sale. What this standardization will lead to is maybe getting closer to what we have here in the UK, which is, if you want to top up your account, if you want to make a bank payment for a certain product, for a certain service, the journey is essentially the same. So once you've made one, you are familiar with it, you recognize that you're paying essentially through your trusted bank. That's extremely valuable without having, additional steps, additional confirmations, errors that come up out of nowhere and annoy you. If we get well close to that in Europe, I think that'll be a success for PSD3. And like I said, there's a regulation part, so which we think will help with adoption, and then there's what the market is doing, and this is probably maybe as exciting to me as the regulation part, which is that there are efforts to try to change this perception that open banking is just about regulation. It's just a compliance exercise for banks, right? Because that's let's be honest, that's been one of the main complaints that we've heard under PSD2, and there is this growing effort through the European Payments Council, so it's the body that also governs SEPA Instant and other payment schemes, to create a commercial model for open banking. So a scheme, a structure, a framework whereby for premium services or things that go beyond the regulation, banks can get paid by open banking providers. And that's extremely exciting. You mentioned variable recurring payments earlier, so that is probably one of the most exciting things that exists within that framework, right? And that is the way that we get to even more seamless and more innovative, exciting use cases in Europe. I think the challenge right now is kind of making more banks, more providers aware of this and kind of getting everyone on board. But once it does, we do get a critical mass of that. I think it'll be a very exciting time, and we will see this shift from, like I said, just looking at open banking as compliance to open banking is an opportunity for all sides of the market to kind of innovate together.
Yeah. A commercially viable opportunity for the banks to really get behind, right?
100%.
No, completely agree. And when we look at the time frame, so you mentioned earlier that, of course, this is still something that's ongoing, right? That there has been snippets and insights that have been released, every now and then, just to give a bit of a flavour for what this is ultimately going to look like. But there are negotiations still happening around a lot of this. What are the timeframes that we're expected to see? I believe is it 2025 that we're really looking at in terms of things coming into effect, and 2026 for it to be implemented, or?
I think roughly so. It's very hard to I think whatever you have right now are best guesses or estimates, but I think the negotiations themselves should finish sometime in the first half of next year, and then we're looking at 2026 and 2027 for kind of the deadlines for those implementations. Yeah, that is my finger in the air estimate right now.
Okay. And so, I mean, in terms of businesses out there now that are looking, of course, to prepare, and they have to be thinking about this quite seriously now. What is your advice? Well, I guess first of all, what are TrueLayer doing in terms of preparation for these regulations to come into force? And what would be your advice you'd give to other businesses that are thinking that they need to start to prepare at the moment?
Well, obviously that depends on what your business is doing, but essentially the top line would be get prepared because some things are changing. We know for a fact that the anti-fraud measures in PSD2, so the anti-fraud measures for all digital payments, are being looked at. Policymakers take that subject very seriously, and of course, rightly so. So there might maybe changes for your own business model that you need to be aware of and consider. That might take a long time to implement, of course. But regardless, they are changing. Some important changes are coming. the European Commission likes to describe PSD3 as an evolution, not a revolution. So, like I said, not everything is being started from scratch, of course, but there will be important things that you need to be aware of. And from a purely self-interested point of view, I would say also look up 𝗂𝗏. Come talk to me about 𝗂𝗏, that commercial model for open banking that I was talking about, because that is probably as exciting, if not more, than the regulation itself.
Yeah, fantastic. And from TrueLayer's perspective, what are you guys doing in terms of preparation? What's some of the key things that you're putting in place at the moment?
Well, I mean,
if you're able to share.
Well, I mean, like our bread and butter are account-to-account payments, so we're continuing to roll out and improve account-to-account payments across specific European markets. Obviously, we're very hopeful that with PSD3, we'll see improvements across all member states, and we'll be able to basically provide more and better, even better services to our merchants and to their end users. So there's some very exciting things in the works that I, maybe watch this space, can't really go into right now, but they are coming.
Yeah. Fantastic. Sounds good. All right. And look, this is a People of Payments podcast after all. So really interested to get your thoughts and opinions around the future of payments. And I think it's clear just from this conversation, there's so much to look forward to. Of course, this conversation, being that you're very much focused on the EU, has been centered around EU, but of course, there's a lot going on for the rest of the world as well. But I mean, if you was to have a crystal ball and you would look into future 5-10 years ahead of time, what do you believe is really going to be happening in the future of payments?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. Really hard to make predictions. I think let's looking at it from Europe's perspective, I think there's a good case and a bad case, right? The EU is very, very actively trying to come up with their own alternative, like a European payment method, something that competes with Visa and MasterCard, something that kind of maybe reduces that dependency. I think worst case, things don't go as planned. We'll continue to be dominated by Visa and MasterCard. Merchants will continue to complain about merchant fees and so on. A good case is you let these new changes, the commercial model together, they basically allow smaller companies, fintechs, to come in, use the infrastructure, create a European payment method that's based on bank payments, essentially account-to-account payments, and real-time transfers. Yep. And Europe becomes a leader. There's a lot of competition, or at least a lot of envy in a way. When you look at Brazil, look at India, at how their modern real-time payment systems have evolved and grown. I think in Brazil, that's the stat that astounds me, is there are more payments made now through Pix than with credit and debit cards combined. And that is the kind of success I think that Europe aspires to. The question is how do you get to it? So it's a very exciting space, and I think maybe even that this competition between different parts of the world will benefit everyone. But overall, I think account-to-account payments are here to stay, and I think we'll see a lot of growth here in the US, in Brazil, and many other places. That is my very safe prediction. I'll be very honest; it's a very safe bet.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's always good to get the insights and the thoughts for the future. And look, I really do appreciate you taking the time. I know you're extremely busy, lots going on your side, so appreciate you taking the time out of your day to speak with us today. Just for the listeners, we're going to put some links into the description of this video. So we're going to put a link to Andrei's LinkedIn profile. So if you do want to go and have a chat with Andrei, feel free to reach out to him. We're also going to put a copy of a blog that he wrote specifically around PSD3, PSR1, just so you can get some more insights from there. And of course, a link to TrueLayer's website, so you can go and see exactly what they're up to and what they're doing in the business. But Andrei, for now, really appreciate your time, as I mentioned. And great speaking with you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me. Love the chat.